What do you think when you think about the book Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas? Do you think about the roots of gonzo journalism? Do you think about a drug-fueled craze? Do you think about the political state of America at the time? Regardless of what image the work brings to mind, clearly the intended meaning of the work is hidden in subtlety and nuance. But it's obvious that the tone is critical. Critical of exactly what, however, is up for debate. This criticism is exactly what embodies the satire. But who does the story attack specifically and directly? And who does the story attack non-directly? These are the questions this presentation hopes to answer. And by looking at the elements of the plot, it can help us better answer them. However, as a group we have come to our conclusion on who the criticism is directed towards. And it may not be exactly who it seems. Although directly, the narrator attacks the establishment and the powers that be throughout his journey, his state of being in constant recklessness suggests that he himself deserves to be attacked as well. In fact, arguably more than the people he criticizes himself. Hunter S. Thompson's inclusion of the disillusion and the predicaments the narrator finds himself in is not to show the effect of the drugs he took, but instead it is to show that there is more to be concerned about here that isn't directly attacked by the narrator. In fact, not only does the narrator deserve to be criticized, the general public of Las Vegas itself deserves to be criticized. The narrator goes to Las Vegas in search of the American dream. Throughout the story, you see how Las Vegas is supposed to embody the American dream. This is the key to the satiric goal of the novel. If Las Vegas is the American dream, and Las Vegas is also the heart of gluttony and overindulgence in the country, is the American dream gluttony and overindulgence? If so, this brings up an interesting feud between the current ideals of the era. This novel was written in 1971, the beginning of the psychedelic 70s. People were trying lots of new things, and drug use was booming, noticeably amongst hippie culture. While the 70s were known for acceptance to things that seemed odd, they certainly weren't entirely accepting. Some people still wanted the straight-edge life of the past, and idolized 9-to-5 workdays and coming home to a nuclear family. These two thought processes naturally went head-to-head. Hippies thought those who stuck with the old ways were going to be left in the past, and they didn't respect the cookie-cutter lifestyle because of its lack of flair. While the 9-to-5ers thought that the hippies spent a little too much time indulging and thought that they should get to work. The problem exists because both groups strive to get to a place like Vegas and chase the American dream, where they can overindulge freely and without rules. So even if hippies were being judged for their overindulgence in the drug lifestyle, 9-to-5ers would work so that they can overindulge in the same way in Vegas, just like the hippies do. Our group thinks that this satire is an attack on what was perceived as right and wrong in regards to life choices at the time of the novel. On a deeper level, it is commentary on human nature and the tendency to be at each other's throats for surface-level things, when clearly, in the end, we strive for the same thing, and are not as distant as we think each other to be. This is told through the political state of America in 1971, and the relationships between hippies and the status quo. But what is satire? All semester, we've used the same definition. Satire is an attack by means of manifest fiction upon discernible historical particulars. With this knowledge, let's break down what this means in relation to my group's argument on the satirical purpose of this novel. What exactly is it attacking? The novel is attacking the common ideals of the time. More specifically, the perceived difference between what is right and what is wrong. How does the satire attack? It attacks in many ways. One of the things this presentation aims to accomplish is to show you the specific literary strategies used to amplify this attack. What are the discernible historical particulars? The particulars in this novel are the state of American ideals in 1971, hippies, and drug culture.
Thompson relies heavily on his unreliable narrator to deliver the satirical attacks in Fear and Loathing. An unreliable narrator tells a story through their first-person perspective. The story is greatly shaped by their personal views, perceptions, and biases. They may not be credible or trustworthy, so as the audience, we simply have to step into their shoes and their mindset in order to read between the lines and draw our own conclusions about what's happening. Thompson's unreliable narrator gives the audience insight into the mind of a follower of the 70s hippie counterculture. The fact that the narrator is on heavy drugs throughout pretty much the entire book makes the narration unreliable in and of itself. A lot of the story is told through the lens of his psychedelic-induced hallucinations and paranoia. However, there's much more to it than just that. He is chasing what he believes to be the American dream, though his methods, morals, and values are highly skewed. On page 4, he says, "Once you get locked into a serious drug collection, the tendency is to push it as far as you can. However, this is definitely considered a somewhat unpopular and very morally gray perspective. To the narrator, this is his American dream. Overindulging on drugs like acid and mescaline certainly does not appeal to everyone, especially a lot of the other people he encounters in Vegas, such as the police at the drug awareness convention he attends while he's heavily under the influence. To them, his actions would be considered wrong and illegal and absolutely outrageous. But he sees it in a different light. His own perspective makes it seem completely logical and justified to him. He describes wanting to push the act all the way to the limit. He finds it delightfully ironic that he's there, absolutely tripping balls. He describes it on page 110 as a matter of lifestyle, a sense of obligation, and even duty, to represent the drug culture. There is a great juxtaposition between all the other attendees of the convention who are status quo following law enforcers and the narrator with his free-spirited yet highly skewed ideas. This is a great example of how Thompson used the unreliable narrator trope to push the idea that everyone is seeking the American dream through deeply different methods, sometimes crossing the boundaries of right and wrong in the name of overindulgence. In the end, he and the police at the convention are all there in the same place, though for very different reasons and in very different mental states. Another contribution is Thompson's genre of gonzo journalism, which we did touch on in class. However, there is a lot more to be said about how it's a perfect blend with the trope of the unreliable narrator. It's a mix between storytelling and journalism. The narrative takes place highly within the journalist's mind and thoughts, retelling the event through their perspective, though it sometimes infuses the story with bias or even hypocrisy. It's almost satirical by nature, making it perfect for a piece involving an unreliable narrator. We are being told the story through Thompson's personal thoughts, experiences, and perspectives he had while covering the events he attended. We are reading a book about the American dream through the eyes of a journalist who wrote about it while simultaneously chasing it, and his stream of consciousness gives us insights into what that really means to him and so many others. Another method Thompson utilizes is visual irony. Visual irony is conveyed through images instead of words. Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas contains many illustrations, all of which are exaggerated caricatures of the characters in the story. On pages 30 and 31, there was a large illustration of the customers in the bar the characters are at. However, they're depicted as animalistic lizard creatures instead of people, just like how the narrator hallucinates them to be. Just like Thompson and his attorney, they are there in Vegas as well, overindulging like animals. However, the visual irony is not only limited to the illustrations in the book, but the settings and the circumstances that are described through the imagery as well. Once again, the juxtaposition between the main characters and the rest of the attendees at the drug convention is deeply ironic. They are two messy drug fiends, while the rest of the people there are put-together police officers. They embody what is considered bad in society, while the police embody what is considered good. However, they are there at the same event, though for wildly different reasons.
The early 1970s were quite eventful years in American history. On the international level, the U.S.'s involvement in the Vietnam War was rightly criticized. The Pentagon Papers were also leaked by Daniel Ellsberg to the New York Times on June 13, 1971. This also caused outrage. The release of these papers contradicted previous information given by the U.S. about their involvement in Vietnam. The government's response to this release also, of course, called outrage. Daniel Ellsberg faced multiple felony charges after leaking the Pentagon Papers to the New York Times. Of course, tensions with the USSR were at an all-time high. On the domestic level, there were several cases of police corruption and racketeering. The Knapp Commission was created on April of 1970 to investigate these allegations in New York City. The report confirming these allegations were not released until 1972, but the proceedings of the commission received substantial media attention. Crime was also on the rise during the 1970s, which caused politicians to adopt much harsher penalties. On June 18, 1971, the War on Drugs began. This was a concerted global effort led by the United States to reduce the global consumption and distribution of illegal drugs. All of these events contributed to low public trust in the U.S. government, which influenced Thompson in his writing of Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. Now we look at the second portion of the novel during the police convention on drug use. The reading is taken from page 139, where Thompson reports on the keynote speech at the convention. Thompson writes, "Dr. Bloomquist's book is a compendium of state BS. On page 49, he explains the 4 states of being in a cannabis society: cool, groovy, hip, and square, in that descending order. The square is seldom if ever cool, says Bloomquist. He is not with it, that is. He does not know what's happening. But if he manages to figure it out, he moves up a notch to hip. And if he can bring himself to approve of what's happening, he becomes groovy. And after that, with much luck and perseverance, he can rise to the rank of cool." Dr. Bloomquist's keynote speech is an attempt to codify the doxa and structure of the hippie subculture. He claims that the hippie subculture is divided into 4 distinct classes. He argues that the members of the hippie subculture gain power by understanding and prescribing to the ideas of this subculture. This analysis closely mirrors Bourdieu's theory of social fields. Dr. Bloomquist's analysis of the hippie subculture is humorously incorrect. There's clearly no formal hierarchy within the hippie subculture. This demonstrates that there's a fundamental disconnect between the mainstream and hippie culture. Thompson is arguing that mainstream society, specifically those in law enforcement, simply do not understand any of the beliefs, ideas, motivations, or behaviors of the hippies. This misunderstanding fuels much of the conflict between the hippies and the traditional Americans. Thompson later claims that the entire speech was full of the same kind of gibberish nonsense.
In conclusion, we've stated that Thompson uses the tropes of unreliable narrator, gonzo journalism, and visual irony to criticize the common ideals of the time and what is perceived as right and wrong. He uses unreliable narrator by having the point of view we see the events of the story through have a lens of hallucinations and drug-fueled fantasies. He uses gonzo journalism to connect the story and journalism seen throughout. And he uses visual irony to exaggerate characters by having them appear animalistic or monstrous. An example of this is that in the illustrations seen throughout the book, the people are grotesque. They have massive heads and can sometimes look like animals. Overall, our group believes Hunter S. Thompson truly wanted to relay that even though the 9-to-5ers were so different in their ideologies, they all strove to get for the same thing: the American dream. Vegas. The same Vegas which brings gluttony and overindulgence out of everybody. Now, for some discussion questions. If possible, how do you think the hippies and the 9-to-5ers could have seen that they were not so different after all? And do you think that Thompson's criticism of what was seen as right and wrong in the 1970s has merit? Why or why not? Thank you.